It's another edition of Time About the Movies, and today we're taking a look at the films of June 17th, 1994. We got 3 movies to look at today, so let's not waste any more time. Let's jump right on into it, and we'll start off with the biggest new release of the weekend, Jack Nicholson and Michelle Pfeiffer starring in Wolf. Believe it or not, there was a time in the 90s when Sony kind of made their own... Remember how Universal was going to make this dark universe where they were going to have all these different reboots of different horror movie icons, and that never happened because the Mummy quickly came and went and died a slow, painful death? Well, Sony kind of had their own thing going back then. I mean, we looked at Bram Stoker's Dracula from Francis Ford Coppola, which was a good movie. And then later on this year, we'll have Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And, I don't know, I guess you could kind of consider Mary Riley kind of that movie, too, because it's supposed to be Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And then even at the end of the decade, or not even at the end of the decade, the start of the decade of the 2000s, you had Hollow Man, which is basically the Invisible Man. And here you have Wolf, which is essentially the Wolf Man. And it's a very interesting take on the werewolf type of story. Like, it's not trying to be another American Werewolf in London. It's trying to be something more modernized, more slower paced. And overall, it's a pretty good movie. I will say that there are things about it that I think stick out more that go against the film overall. One of the things I think the movie kind of fails to do is something kind of like how The Fly worked. Like how in The Fly, Jeff Goldblum turns into this creature, and slowly but surely, it just slowly turns him into this disgusting creature. And I think they were trying to do the same thing here with Nicholson and Pfeiffer, trying to make them like Goldberg and Gina Davis in that movie, but I don't know. I thought The Fly did it a whole lot better, but I mean, you go to this movie mostly to see Jack Nicholson do Jack Nicholson, and Jack Nicholson is doing what Jack Nicholson does, and he becomes a werewolf. And I think the chemistry between him and Michelle Pfeiffer works okay. I don't think it's overall great in here, but I do gotta applaud the movie for trying to create this new modernized take of the Wolfman and what it would be like with this sort of realistic dialogue that they have working here. It's got a great cast overall besides Nicholson and Pfeiffer. You got James Spader, Kate Nelligan, Richard Jenkins, Christopher Plummer's in here, David Hyde Pierce. Who else is in here? You got David Schwimmer in a cameo. Allison Janney is also in here as well. There's just enough. There's just enough there that I think it really does become a very solid film. Not a great film overall, but it's very stylized. It does get the creep factor in there. It's very tense as well, and it's an overall enjoyable movie. I think it could have been a whole lot better for what it was, but I mean, when this movie came out, it did legitimately scare me. But then again, I was only about 5-6 years old at the time, so that wouldn't be too surprising. I never saw the movie as a little kid, but I used to see the trailers for this all the time, and I saw the videotape for this when we went to the video store, not Blockbuster, because we really didn't get Blockbuster around my neck of the woods until about the 2000s, and that was kind of at the end of the road for them, unfortunately. But we did have stuff like Far More and Giant Eagle, and the Giant Eagle that I work at had the Eagle Video, which is like a video rental place, and I definitely remember seeing this cover and this poster there, and yeah, the movie overall legitimately did deliver what it promises. It's a very tense, very terrifying film. Not a perfect film overall, but more than good enough to recommend it. If you want to see a different, modernized, stylized version of the Wolfman that hasn't been done before, this definitely works out very well. And considering some of the stuff we've gotten since then, like American Werewolf in Paris, which is a terrible sequel to an American Werewolf in London, we'll get to that in '97, and then the Wolfman, the Benicio del Toro one in 2010. This one kind of is the best of the bunch, honestly. Other than that, yeah, that's pretty much all I got for you. Wolf, fantastic film. Definitely check it out. So with that said, let's move on to the next movie, and that is Macaulay Culkin and Ted Danson in Getting Even with Dad.
I guess your family was dysfunctional too. That's what we are. You and me, we're dysfunctional.
You've been watching way too much Oprah. R-E-S-P-C-T, find out what it means to me.
So on paper, this doesn't seem like a really bad idea. I mean, it's Macaulay Culkin playing this kid, Ted Danson playing this father who's actually a criminal, and the kid has not been getting the attention from dad, so he basically steals the stuff that he stole to try to get him to connect with him more. And really, you don't think that's going to be a bad idea, but as far as the movie itself goes, it really doesn't work at all, and it's not really the fault of Danson and Culkin. They're trying their best here, but the script overall, I think, is trying way too hard to be another Home Alone type of film. I mean, you even see in the trailer that he's got traps in there similar to Home Alone. It's just like, you don't have to put this in every single movie, guys. I mean, let us see what Macaulay Culkin can do as an actor, and I don't think Macaulay Culkin has been a bad actor. These movies that he made after Home Alone have not been very good, but it's not because of him. I think he's just picking whatever scripts he's been given, and I think I think this was one of those rare movies that actually came out outside of the holidays, because if you look at that stretch between 1990 and 1994, Macaulay Culkin had been in a lot of movies that came out during the holidays. There were movies that were kind of big, movies that people would come back to every holiday is during the holiday season, and they stuck this out in the summertime to see how good his range can be outside of his box office range can be, and the end result was not very. It wasn't all that interesting and not that very good. And I don't know if Culkin himself picked the script, or maybe it was his parents, because I know he had his parents were kind of in the way. And actually, I'm reading right here, his father was actually demanding his son. He was actually kind of pushing his son to be in these situations. Like, his character in this movie was supposed to have a short haircut, kind of like what he did in Home Alone, I think. And he let his hair grow out at the time, and his dad actually demanded his son be allowed to keep the haircut that he had, pointing out that his character was a working class boy and not a clean-cut prep school one. And so he got to keep his long hair in this. And, I mean, it doesn't really seem like it's that bad of a movie from the trailer, but it's just kind of a boring movie, honestly. I mean, Danson and Culkin are trying their best to really hold this together, but just those moments when it's trying to be way too much like another Home Alone type of film. And it is very formulaic. You can kind of predict what's going to happen at the end of it. They're going to have a breakup at the end of it after they're getting along, and then they're going to have to connect again in the third act. That type of thing. And it's just kind of like, it's just not an enjoyable movie. It's a movie that was largely forgettable, and it was quickly thrashed by critics. I think it got 3% on Rotten Tomatoes, which, I mean, I've seen some bad movies that are much worse than this, but I'm not going to say it's a great movie by any means either. It's a movie that's just not. It's just not a very enjoyable film. It's a very lackluster film, despite the efforts of both Culkin and Danson. I think they're trying their best to save this, and it's just not enough to save it. I think the better movies from Culkin come out later on in the holiday season, and coincidentally, it was the last two movies he made at the peak of his star power with Home Alone. So we'll definitely get to those ones later on, and like I said, they're much better movies than this one is. So that's getting even with Dad. Now let's get to the last movie of the weekend, and it's the limited release of a movie that not only would become one of the biggest hits of the year, one of the biggest animated films of all time, one of the great Disney classics of all time. It opened in limited release this weekend, only in a couple of theaters, before it eventually went wide the following week. I'm, of course, talking about Disney's epic animated classic, Kimba the White Lion. Or The Lion King. You knew I had to make that joke, because, if you don't know, everybody thinks The Lion King was a ripoff of Kimba the White Lion, the anime, and I think they actually went to court on that, and I think Disney actually won that. I could be wrong on that, but that's the reason why I did the bit at the beginning about Kimba the White Lion. But anyway, yes, The Lion King did come out in limited release on this particular weekend in 1994. It only opened in a couple of theaters in California and New York, and I don't think anybody really knew how big of a hit this movie was going to be. This was going to be a hit on the level of something like Jurassic Park the year before, which was this huge monster hit that everybody thought was going to be a hit, but I don't think anybody really expected it to be as big of a hit it was. I think it was the highest tested movie Disney ever had up to that point, which is amazing to think about. There was just so much hype after what Disney had done before. Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, these Oscar-winning movies, these classic films. And everybody thought that this was going to be that next big thing. It's interesting, one of my favorite stories from Waking Sleeping Beauty, which is a fantastic documentary. I think I've talked about it before on this particular show, but if you haven't seen that movie, definitely check it out. One of the great bits that I always remember about that was when Jeffrey Katzenberg, who was at Disney at the time, actually, he had just left Disney at the time, and he was in the middle of the production of this movie. He thought that Pocahontas was going to be the next big hit. It was going to be the next West Side Story, and then with The Lion King, he kept saying that it was going to be an experiment. He didn't think anybody was going to go see it, and that just shows you how much Jeffrey Katzenberg, as great of a genius as he could be, he really had no idea what he was thinking about. I mean, if you want to hear about some of the crazy things that he said, look at the stuff that he said about Roku TV, about the Roku TV shows that they were doing it's most recently around COVID. Okay, it wasn't even Roku TV; it was actually Quibi. I mean, how could you forget Quibi? I mean, well, actually, to be fair, most of those shows that were on Quibi actually moved over to Roku TV, where they've had better success than what they had on Quibi. Quibi didn't work because it was basically most of the content they had on Quibi was basically the parody. If you've ever seen the parody shows on 30 Rock, it was basically those, except these were meant to be taken seriously. Like every once in a while, you'd get one show that's actually kind of like, this isn't that bad, like Reno 911, of course. And then you had the Die Hard series with John Travolta and Kevin Hart, but everything else about that show that streaming service was just so bad. It died a quick death after the pandemic peaked, and it basically showed you how much Jeffrey Katzenberg really had no idea what he was doing and some of the crazy things he said about it. I can't go into it right now. I've spent way too much time on it talking about it, but yeah. So, bottom line, Jeffrey Katzenberg thought this was a crazy idea that wasn't going to go anywhere, and lo and behold, Lion King is still a classic to this day, and Pocahontas wasn't a bad film, but it wasn't even a big bomb, but it certainly doesn't have the lasting legacy that The Lion King does, and yeah, The Lion King still holds up very well for the most part. Now, granted, it does have its flaws. I think there are parts of it that do rip off Bambi, and there are things about it that are they're not bad things, but they're mostly nitpicks. They're mostly things that I think when most people talk about the original Lion King and how great of a movie it is, they completely forget about those type of things. They forget about those type of things that really feel like it what do I want to say here? They feel like The Lion King is so sacred. Like, it's like, if you say anything bad about this movie, it's like you're saying something bad about Jesus. Like, that's the type of thing that happens whenever you talk sort of negatively about this movie. And I say sort of negatively because there are flaws to the movie. I don't think it holds up as well as some of the other Disney films that came out in between Oliver and Company and this, but it does hold up very well for the most part. I mean, the animation is still spectacular. Some of the best animation Disney had done up to this point. The final climactic scene is so well done. The acting is very well done. I honestly think this is one of Matthew Broderick's best performances, honestly. This, Ferris Bueller, War Games, the characters are memorable too. Timon and Pumbaa especially. The songs are memorable. Like, you could still listen to these songs anytime and you'll never forget the lyrics to them. And like I said, the biggest flaws of the movie, I think, come in the story department. There's stuff that's ripped right out of Bambi. There's stuff that's redone to make it look like the original. And you can tell which scenes they're ripping off. There are other things as well. Like, there's a good lesson in there that Rafiki tells the adult Simba. But then, in the final battle, it becomes moot because essentially he's been lied to this whole time. And so he really doesn't really learn anything afterwards. I mean, it's a weird thing. Like, it's weird to really delve into the flaws of the film, because there are flaws in here, and I think a lot of people overlook those flaws when they're talking about this movie, because The Lion King really does stand the test of time. It's a movie that does hold up well to this day. I don't think it's as good as some of the other Disney movies that were coming out at this peak time, like Little Mermaid, Aladdin, Beauty and the Beast. I think those movies are held up to a much higher standard, but in the end, it does hold up well. Over time, it has held up very well. When it was re-released in IMAX 3D, I went to go see it several times on a big screen because I wanted to see that feeling for the first time. And if it ever goes back on the big screen again, I definitely go check it out again. It's a movie that really has held up the test of time for the most part. It has flaws to it, but it's still a very good movie. It's still a very well-made film. It's one of Disney's biggest classics for a reason, and you can see why it was such a big hit at the time, because it was just the culmination of everything that made Disney what it was back then, working so well at that point that everybody just kept coming back to it and coming back to it, and it was one of the biggest hits of the summer, one of the biggest hits of the year, and it's a movie that has still held the test of time on various formats. Like, there was a time period between, I think, 2016 and 2019 that you couldn't go to Freeform or ABC Family or whatever it was called back then and not see a weekend where The Lion King was not playing on TV. It was playing on TV, I think, a record about about almost 50 to 100 times in between 2016 and 2019 when the live action remake came out. I remember this because every weekend I would keep seeing The Lion King on there, and it's just like I can't argue with them putting it on there because it's one of their most beloved movies, and for good reason. So I've spent way too long talking about this movie, but really, what more do I need to say about it? The Lion King, it's a classic film. It's a great movie, one of Disney's classics. It's The Lion King, man. Lion King. And so on that note, we wrap up another edition of Time About the Movies. Next time, we'll wrap up June. Since we've already covered The Lion King, that was the big new release for next weekend. We'll have two movies to look at, including Kevin Costner's Wyatt Earp and also Freedom on My Mind. So we'll look at those two movies next time, and we'll do that on the next episode. But until then, thank you very much for watching, and if you want to see more videos like this, please hit the playlist on the next page, check out the previous episode, and I will see you guys tomorrow for another episode. So thank you for watching. I'll see you next time, and until then, as always, take care.